starchy, by the way, but in the context of this diet, it seems to work really well. And they find their diabetes subsiding, and their insulin resistance subsiding, and their weight going down, and their blood pressure. And there's a famous experiment I describe of it's these populations that are new to the Western diet that have the most trouble with it. And we've seen this with Mexicans coming to the United States, and Pacific Islanders. And in Australia, the biggest problem with obesity and diabetes is among the Aborigines moving to the city. They reliably get heavy diabetic heart disease. And so this researcher had this idea of, I'm going to take a group of fairly recently arrived Aborigines who still know how to hunt and gather, and see what happens if I brought them back to the bush and let them eat the way they used to eat. And so she took this group of, I think it was 12 diabetic Aborigines, and they left the city, and she dumped them out somewhere in the bush, and they returned to their customary way of hunting and gathering. And within 6 weeks, all their markers for diabetes had fallen back into the normal range. Their blood pressure had fallen back into the normal range. They'd lost 10 or 12 pounds, and they were like miraculously cured. Now, I'm sure when they went back to the cities, their problems relapsed. And, you know, none of us wants to go back to the bush to be hunters and gatherers. There's not enough bush, and there are too many of us. Not to mention we don't know how to do it anymore. I mean, I did in Omnivore's Dilemma. I went hunting and gathered mushrooms, but I don't want to do it every day. So that's the challenge, is how do you get off the Western diet without leaving civilization? And, you know, as I said, and I think maybe we should, you know, end on this note, we live in really good times in terms of our options. The best advice for your health turns out, the best choices for your health turn out to be the best choices for the environment. That is to say, if you do what I suggest here, eat food, not too much, mostly plants, you find well-grown food from healthy soils, grown with care, preferably local, seasonal, and you prepare that yourself, not only will your health be improved, but so will your happiness, because there's great satisfaction in eating this way. And we're not just talking about health. There's more at stake than health. But even better, the soil will be healthier, the grass will be healthier, these animals will be healthier, and the climate will be better for it too, because you won't be using quite so much fossil fuel to feed yourselves. So we have voting with our forks is a very powerful thing. It does a lot for us, and it does a lot for the land. The challenge is, of course, and I'm surprised no one's asked this question, is that it's more expensive to eat this way. We've talked about that it's more time-consuming, because you do need to cook, but it's more expensive too. And the issue of access is one we have to address. Now, most of the people in this room probably can afford to spend a little bit more on food. We all need to spend more on food if we can. As a society, we're spending less than 10% of our income on food. That's lower than any people in history, any people anywhere on the planet today. Even in Europe, where people have a higher standard of living than we do, places like France and Italy, they spend 15% or so of their money on food. We only spend 9.5. So there is some give, is what I'm suggesting. There is money we're spending on other things. 20 years ago, we didn't have that second phone bill for cell phones. We didn't pay for television. You know, we have money for the things we value. And I'm saying we've devalued food, and we need to revalue. And one of my bits of advice in this book is pay more and eat less. Go for quality and not quantity. And get your head around, you know, taking pleasure in spending a few dollars for a dozen really well-grown eggs. It's not that much money. We seem to understand value in every other product. We know a good car costs more than a crummy car. We know a good shirt or a good sweater or a good dress costs more than a crummy version from, you know, Walmart or something like that. Why don't we know that about a dozen eggs? Why do we think all eggs are created equal? They're not. You know, you get what you pay for. So those of us who can need to pay more. And those of us who can't, what about them? Well, there probably are 20, 25% of people who are so tight that they cannot afford to spend more money on food. And this is where voting with our forks will not do enough. We need to vote with our votes as well. We need to change our foreign policies. Because the reason that healthy food costs more than junk food is by and large because we subsidize junk food and we don't subsidize healthy food. So those calories in the supermarket, the added fat, the added sugar, the high fructose corn syrup, that it's cheap not because it's cheap to make, but because the government subsidizes the growing of those crops and does nothing for the carrot and nothing for the broccoli. So we need policies that will get our farmers to grow food and not these building blocks of the fast food nation. And there are many other things we need to do to make access. We need to bring supermarkets into the inner city. There are no sources of fresh produce there. And the closer you live, you can measure this in yards, the closer you live to a source of fresh produce, the healthier you are. The CDC knows this. Now it's time to do something about it. So I'm going to leave it there, and thank you, and thanks for your great question.
He also mentioned how they went about sweeteners earlier, and they were talking about Splenda,
Pollan
but really was
University of California, Berkeley.
if you give kids soda and there's artificial versus like natural or whatever kind of sweeteners, the kids still stay overweight. What it is that corn syrup. There's corn syrup. Whatever the corn syrup is in, which is a substance used to preserve, that's a natural sugar, and so that's what's gonna get you fat.